Okay, it's good to be back again together, and we're continuing our series on the 8 appointed times of God, as he describes them in Leviticus chapter 23, giving them to Moses, to Israel, and to all of us today, to find out what is God's timetable, His plan, His timetable as far as His plan of salvation goes. So we've seen last time about the first one, the Shabbat, the Saturday, a time of rest, a time when Adam and Eve not only were in the Garden of Eden and had physical rest, but they had a deep, true meaning of rest as long as they had peace with God. Rest in their soul, rest in their spirits, open relationship with their Creator. All of that was disrupted when we have sinned, when they have sinned, and as a result, we are all born with our sinful nature. You see, when you read in the first book of Moses, in chapter 2 and verse 7, when it came time for God, for Jesus, we know that God created the world, but we also know from the New Testament that He created it through Yeshua. Yeshua is God who created the world. And in chapter 2 of Genesis, verse 7, when it came to create Adam, He didn't say, let there be a man, and boom, it came to be. No. That's what He said when it came to do the stars, or the animals, or the seas, or day and night, and all of that. He said, let there be, and it came to be. But when it came to Adam, He created him. He made him out of earth. And when an artist makes a statue, he puts in his heart, he puts in his full attention, he puts all of his talent, all of his love. And God is saying to us, I poured myself into you. I created you in my image. I did you with much love. And then as Adam was laying there, just as a statue made out of this earth, God breathed spirit into him. And the Hebrew word of it is vaypach. And if you listen to the phonetics of this word, vaypach, you hear this explosion, the pooh, the whoosh, breathing into him. How do you breathe into a person today? You bring your mouth into his mouth and you breathe into him. And this is the picture, the image that we get here. So you see a very intimate, a love relationship from the beginning. God created us with so much love. And all of this is to say that when Adam and Eve sinned, and they were put away from the Garden of Eden, it was not easy for God to do that. His heart was broken. He wanted to continue this fellowship. And from that moment on, God knew that He will have to sacrifice the best of Himself. He will have to sacrifice Yeshua, His only begotten Son. Just like Abraham was called to sacrifice Isaac, and all of this was only a picture, a foreshadow of God the Father giving away Yeshua, His Son, for our sins. Yeshua knew this. And so from the beginning, God tells the serpent that the time will come when the seed of the woman will crush his head. The serpent being a picture of the devil, who managed to pull away the beloved mankind away from God. God gave Adam and Eve only one test of love in the Garden of Eden. One test of obedience. Don't eat of this one tree. You have all the Garden of Eden. It was a huge garden. Eat of all of it. It's all for you. Only one tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that is the test to show that you love me. Obey me. And they failed. What a tragedy. But praise God that He still loves us and was willing to sacrifice the best of Himself, as I already said. And this next appointed time, the Passover that we're going to go deep into now, is the time when God came down from heaven to offer Himself for us. In the Garden of Eden, we see already a foreshadow of that, in that God had to slaughter an animal, to take the skin of the animal and to produce some covering for the nakedness of Adam and Eve. Their nakedness is a picture of our sinfulness. And in order to cover that up, blood had to be spilled. Eventually, the blood of the living Son of God. So let's read that passage first of all. in Leviticus chapter 23, verses 4 and 5, it says, "These are the appointed times of the Lord, holy convocations which you shall proclaim at the times appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight is the Lord's Passover." At twilight of the 14th. What is twilight? It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's the last 3 hours of the day. This is when the twilight hours begin. So at that time, God says, this is the Passover. Now, to understand the deep spiritual significance of this feast, we have to go to Exodus chapter 12. This is where we have the full account of what took place at that time in Egypt. Dear ones, let's go back now and let's refresh our memory. What was the situation? What was the circumstance at that time? Well, the children of Israel have been now for over 400 years slaves in Egypt. Moses is coming to deliver them. For 9 times, God smites the Egyptians. Moses says, such and such is going to happen, and it happens. 9 times the children of Israel see the mighty hand of God being raised up against the land of Egypt, against this agriculture, against the animals, against all the temples, hail coming down from heaven and demolishing all the pride the Egyptian took in all of these magnificent buildings that they put up. But then comes the 10th and last plague. God is going to smite the Egyptians one more time. And if you were living at that time and you've seen for 9 times the mighty hand of God, when the 10th time comes, you'll pay close attention to what you're being told. You know it's serious business. There's no playing around. And so what does Moses tell them? Moses gives them very clear instructions. This is in Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. Let's read. "Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, 'This month shall be the beginning of the month for you. It is the first month of the year to you.'" And it's springtime, dear ones. That's the biblical, God-given first month for the nation of Israel. "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, 'On the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's households, a lamb for each household.'" So they all had to take a lamb, and they had to keep it from the 10th day of the first month all the way to the 14th day of the first month. Now here are the instructions. What kind of a lamb they need to take? Verse 5. "Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it," verse 6, "until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight." So here it is, dear ones. Take a lamb, keep it in your house from the 10th to the 14th. That means 5 days. On the 5th day, in twilight, that's when you need to slaughter it. What kind of a lamb? Only male, no female. It has to be perfect, unblemished. No, not blind, not lame, or anything like that. A perfect lamb. Why are these specific instructions given? Dear ones, all of this is a picture of Christ. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul tells us that Christ is our Passover lamb. And indeed, when we compare now what happened with Jesus, his life and the account of his crucifixion, and compare it with the Passover lamb, we find it's a match like a hand fitting into a glove. An amazing match. And it's not a coincidence. This whole Passover feast is a full-blown picture, a shadow of what happened 1,500 years later with Jesus. So Jesus was a male. You see, it was a male that was promised to Eve, your seed. It was Yeshua, the seed. He came from Mary. Mary is the daughter of Eve. He was a male, and he was without any blemish. He was sinless. He was the only man that walked this earth that never sinned. He was indeed a man with flesh, but since he was also God, he could overcome and resist the temptations of the enemy. So he's perfect, he's a lamb, and as I said, kept in the house for 4 days, and on the 5th day had to be slaughtered. Jesus entered into Jerusalem 5 days before his crucifixion. You see in John chapter 12, verse 1, we read that Jesus came to Beit Hini 6 days before the Passover. And then we read again in John chapter 12 and verse 12 that the next day, that means 5 days before Passover, that's when he entered triumphantly into Jerusalem. And we remember the account how the people cut branches of trees, mainly palm branches, and they laid them down before his feet. Others took off their garments and laid them down. It was cold, it was springtime, but at night it was still getting cold in Jerusalem. It's high mountains. And so they were still having their overgarments. And so they would lay them down to the feet of the donkey as Jesus was riding and entering into Jerusalem. He was a fulfillment of Zechariah prophesying that your king shall enter riding on a donkey. Jesus came in as in poverty. Even the donkey didn't belong to him. He was a boar donkey. But yet he was a king, the humble king, which has come to fulfill not his role as a king, but to fulfill his role as a sacrifice and atonement for us. So Yeshua is coming in. The New Testament shows us exactly 5 days into Jerusalem. That was the 10th day of Nisan, the 10th day of the first biblical month. Here we have an Egyptian house, and here we have the lamb. So on the 10th day of the first month, they took the lamb into the house. And on the same day, only 1,500 years later, Jesus enters into Jerusalem. Jerusalem being like the household of Israel. And the nation loved him. The nation loved him. But you know, when this lamb was brought into the house of this Israeli family and stayed there for 5 days, what do you think happened in this house? You see, the children of Israel loved having children. It's unlike today where, many families have a boy and a girl and a cat and a dog at home. They don't want many more children. But the Israeli family, they wanted many children. Okay? The more the better. Look at the story of Leah and Rachel or others. They wanted many children. This was a sign of blessing for the women, for the mothers. So imagine this lamb being brought into this typical Israeli home, and they had their 11 children. 11 years they're married, they have 11 children. Okay, give and take a couple of years. Okay, so they have lots of kids in case they were fruitful. And here comes little Sarah. She's 5 years old. And she looks at this wonderful little lamb with his black eyes. And she says, oh, how dear, how sweet he is. Let's give him a name. And they give him a loving name. It's called Lammy. And then she says, let's feed him. Okay, so they bring some hay for him to eat. And then her older sister says, no, he needs to drink. It's Rachel, her older sister. So they bring him something to drink. But, they have this Simon brother, he's 7 years old, and he decides that Lammy is going to be a good horse for him. So he jumps on his back and starts riding him. And little Sarah runs to Mama and says, Mama, look what Simon is doing. And so basically this lamb becomes a member of the household. He is in the house for nearly full 5 days. The kids love him. But then comes the 14th of the month. And on the 14th of the month, when the kids wake up, the atmosphere at home is different. Why is it different? Because Moses says that today, the angel of death is going to go over the whole land of Egypt, and he's going to kill every firstborn in the land of Egypt. Even the firstborn of the animals is going to be slaughtered. And Moses told the children of Israel, today you have to be very careful. You have to slaughter the lamb. You have to apply the blood in a certain way, which I will show you in a moment. And this blood is going to protect you from the angel of death, which is going to go through the land of Egypt. But also, today is the last day of your stay in the land of Egypt. Today you're going to come out of here. You're going to go to a new land. You have to pack everything up that you want to take with you and get ready. Could you imagine yourself? Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your parents, you yourself, you grew up there in Egypt as a slave, and now is the day when we're going to go out. Oh, the parents woke up in the morning. Oh, they were kind of tensed. This whole thing, excitement and fear and everything put together all inside of them. So what do we have to pack? And they're starting to make these, taking blankets and throwing in whatever they want and closing it up and getting ready. Tonight we're leaving this land. But as the hours were ticking away, the tension was rising up. And they were waiting. What were they waiting for? They were waiting for the twilight. Because Moses says that God told through Moses to the children of Israel, only in the twilight, this is when you can slaughter this lamb. And slaughtering the lamb is so important because the blood of the lamb smeared on the door, this is what's going to save us from the angel of death. I mean, if you were an Israelite, surely you would wait anxiously for the moment that you can start slaughtering the lamb. And not only that, they had to roast the lamb. You see in Exodus chapter 12, in verse 8, we read the following. And they shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. You see, roasted. It says it is not allowed to be cooked. Roasted. Why roasted? You see, because this lamb is a picture of Jesus, and Jesus died for us on the cross as a sin offering. Sin offerings were to be burned before God on the altar. Jesus took upon himself our punishment of death, of hell. The eternal punishment, he took it all on himself. And this lamb was supposed to be burned after it was slaughtered, roasted, complete. Furthermore, we read here that it was not allowed to break any bones. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 46, it says, it is to be eaten in a single house. You are not to bring forth any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. No breaking of any bones. We know that when Jesus died on the cross, no bones were broken in him. In John chapter 19, verses 33 and 36, we read that as the soldiers came, Jesus was already dead. And they stabbed him to check out that he is indeed dead. Water and blood came flowing out of his side. Yet the two criminals on his right and left hand, they were still alive. And for them to die quickly, the Romans had to break the bones of their legs. Why did they have to break the bones? Because then they could not support themselves anymore. They were hanging on the cross and they were basically suffocating to death. Why was it so important for the Romans to kill them? Well, it wasn't important for the Romans, but it was important for the Jews that they die quickly, because that same evening was the Passover evening. And according to the law of Moses, it is forbidden for dead bodies to be hanging on the tree throughout the night. They have to be put down. It is accursed. In the Old Testament, it says that a body hanging on the tree is a curse, is a sign of a curse. And so these criminals had to die quickly and had to be buried before the sun went down. Once the sun went down, according to the rabbinical teachings, it was forbidden to carry any weight. It is laboring, taking the dead bodies, bringing them into the grave. Forbidden. So all of it had to be done while there was still light. So the Romans break their legs and they die quickly. But Jesus, no bone was broken in him. He was left complete. So we see all of this symbolism. But this is, dear ones, just the beginning. It goes much, much deeper. In Exodus chapter 12, 21 through 23. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and take for yourselves lamb according to your families, and slay the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop, and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the two doorposts. And none of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. They were supposed to take now the lamb and to slaughter it. Now it says here that they had to dip hyssop in the blood which is in the basin. Basin. Dear ones, I'm holding here the Hebrew original of the Bible. And the Hebrew original of the Bible uses the word saf. Saf. The first meaning of the word saf is not a basin. The first meaning of the word saf is the thresh floor, the threshold, down here, the bottom part of the door. That is the first meaning of the word saf. Actually, if you go in the Old Testament and survey all the places where you find the word saf, you find that always it is used to become the bottom part of the entrance of the doorway. Once it is used also as a cup. This is in Zechariah chapter 12, where it talks about Jerusalem becoming a cup of poison for all nations. But most of the times it's used as I already mentioned. Now this verse 22 of chapter 12 of Exodus, is the only verse in the entire Bible which calls all four sides of the door by name. You see, in Hebrew, the upper part is called mashkof. This is the upper part. Mashkof. And the two sides are called mezuzot. The bottom part is called saf. So here we have the only verse in the entire Bible that describes by name all four sides of the door. And what did the translators into English do? They translated the upper part correctly, they translated the two sides correctly, and they mistranslated the bottom part. They changed it into a cup. Now this is a misfortunate mistake, because it blurs the picture which I will show you in a moment. You see, the children of Israel were supposed to apply the blood on the door in this way. These four places, up here, the two sides, and the bottom. Why the bottom? They didn't have to apply it at the bottom, but here is where the lamb got slaughtered. You see, dear ones, if you were the Israeli father and you have to slaughter your lamb, where would you do it? The lamb was 4 days into your house, actually almost 5 days in your house. You're very short with time. There is no much time to start taking the lamb and carrying outside and go to the outskirts of your village. No time for that. And no need. Why would you do that? You see, you're going to apply blood on all three sides anyway. So it's going to be smeared with blood. You don't care about flies coming in. Not only you don't care, you want the blood to be seen, because it's this blood that is going to protect you from the angel of death. Not only that, you're leaving your house tonight. You don't care about tidiness and cleanliness right now. You're packing up and you're going to leave this place. But above all, you have no time. You see, they were waiting and waiting and waiting. When do you think did they slaughter the lamb? They were allowed to slaughter him as of the hour of 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sometime between 3 and 6. This is the afternoon hours. If you were an Israeli father, when would you slaughter your lamb? And if you were the Israeli mother, what would you tell your husband? When do you want him to slaughter the lamb? Well, let me tell you. They were waiting for this moment for nearly 5 days. And when the time comes, they didn't wait till 5 o'clock, knowing that they have to roast this thing before the angel of death comes in and they have to be in the house, finished and done with all of this. They were all waiting. And 3 o'clock, you could see, next to every Israeli house, what you will see now in a moment in this house. The father of the household took out the lamb. It was the afternoon hours, and pulled him to the threshold. The children were looking, "Father, why do you take a knife? What are you going to do with Lammy?" But father took Lammy to the doorthroat and had to slice and cut his whole throat open. And the blood was pouring out and falling straight on the threshold. Lammy was giving his life now, sacrificing his life for the family that was inside. Then the father had to take a bunch of hyssop, very simple branch, plant growing everywhere. And he had to apply the blood on the two sides of the door and on the lintel. This was the blood that the angel of the death, once he sees it, will cause him to skip over the house and not kill the firstborns that were inside. What does all of this mean? Well, dear ones, 1,500 years later, this picture, this image, this shadow was fulfilled when Yeshua, the son of David, came to Jerusalem and sacrificed his life, dying on the cross. He had thorns on his head, crown of thorns, bleeding from his head, bleeding from his two hands, the nails, bleeding from his feet. You see, it was not a coincidence that God put exactly these 4 points, these 4 places, the blood. It was a picture of Yeshua and his sacrifice. So it means a great deal for us. You see, Jesus is the fulfillment of the Passover lamb. I mentioned to you that the Passover lamb was slaughtered at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That was the startup of the twilight. Let's see this fulfilled. In Luke chapter 23 and verses 44 to 46, we read the following. And it was now about the 6th hour. Now, dear ones, the 6th hour in the Roman time meant 12 o'clock noon, because they started counting the hours 6 o'clock during the day, in the morning. And darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. Now, Israel enjoys bright sun, especially at 12 o'clock noon, especially at springtime. There is no question that it's bright. And here we read that darkness fell from 12 noon to 3 o'clock, which is the 9th hour. Now we are at the beginning of the twilight hours. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our time, 9 o'clock Roman time. And it says, the sun being obscured, and the veil of the temple was torn in two, and Jesus crying out with a loud voice said, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. When did Jesus die? Exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Exactly the time when the original Passover lamb in Egypt was slaughtered. You noticed that the father applied the blood on the doorpost with hyssop. And when Jesus was crucified, in his account, again we find the hyssop. This is in John 19, verse 29, we read, a jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of sour wine upon a branch of hyssop and brought it up to his mouth. Is this a coincidence? The right hour, the exact right hour, the hyssop, all the shape, the 4 points of the cross, as you can see it here. Is this all a coincidence? No, dear ones, this is not a coincidence. This is all foreplanned and foreshadowed by God. The nation of Israel, whoever obeyed and believed God, and applied the blood to the door of his house, He was protected as long as he stayed under the blood. In Revelation chapter 3, we read about Jesus speaking to the church of Laodicea, and he says, I stand at the gate and I knock. He knocks at the door. It's the door of our heart. He wants to enter in. There is a door into our heart. And then when we take the blood of the Passover lamb, the blood of Yeshua, our Messiah, and apply it on our lives and remain under it, we are protected from the angel of death. The angel of death skipped over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt. It was not because we as a nation were a good nation. We were a nation of slaves. We weren't a great nation. We were a poor nation. But God loved us, and He chose us because He chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And out of them fulfilled His promises and made a nation, the Jewish nation. And that nation later on continued and grew, and the whole earth has been filled with Jews and with the blessing that came through this nation over the generations. Yeshua is the full picture of the Passover lamb. So when we look at the table, we see that the Passover is a picture of the Lord's first advent for atonement. You see, when Jesus left His place, when Yeshua left His place in heaven and came down to earth, it was for this purpose, to die on the cross. The enemy tried to kill Him when He was a baby. Herod commanded to kill all the babies in Bethlehem from the age of 2 and under. The devil tried to kill Him in Nazareth when the people wanted to throw Him off the mountain. But God protected Yeshua. Yeshua had to die in a certain place, in Jerusalem, on the hill of Golgotha. He had to die in a certain day. He had to die in a certain hour. And He had to die in a certain way. And all of these have been fulfilled. Yeshua is God, coming in a form of man, leaving His place in heaven, coming down to die on the cross. And we will see in the continuation how the next Feast of Unleavened Bread signifies His resurrection. God bless you.